faked bankruptcy to test my greedy family. Then my lawyer walked in. They say you don't truly know your family until you share an inheritance with them. I would argue something slightly different. You don't truly know your own flesh and blood until they believe you have absolutely nothing left to give. For 40 years, I was the engine of my family. I was the provider, the safety net, the silent checkbook that funded the Ivy League tuitions, the lavish weddings, and the down payments on estates I was rarely invited to visit. I built a successful logistics company from the ground up, sacrificing my weekends, my sleep, and my youth to ensure my wife and children never knew the sting of struggle. But 3 months ago, I decided to test the foundation of the fortress I had built. I retired, liquidated my shares, and quietly funneled the money into a blind trust. Then I let a rumor slip. A carefully calculated, devastating rumor that my final commercial real estate investment had catastrophically failed, taking my entire pension and savings with it. According to the whispers I intentionally fed to my wife's country club friends, I was bankrupt, drowning in debt, and facing imminent ruin. The reaction was swifter and more brutal than my darkest nightmares could have predicted. Within 3 weeks, my wife of 35 years, Eleanor, asked for a legal separation to protect her assets. She remained in our 5-bedroom colonial in Connecticut, the house I had paid off a decade ago but placed in her name for tax purposes, while I rented a small, drafty apartment across town. My phone, which used to ring daily with requests for investment advice or subtle pleas for vacation funds, went completely dead. That is the cold, hard reality I carried with me as I drove a rented, sputtering 1998 Honda Civic up the pristine, snow-dusted driveway of my own home on Thanksgiving Day. I had been invited, but only because my youngest daughter, Claire, insisted it would look terrible to the neighbors if I sat alone in a diner on a holiday. I parked the rusted sedan far away from my son Richard's brand new Porsche and Claire's Range Rover. I stepped out into the biting November wind, pulling the collar of a frayed, second-hand wool coat up around my neck. I had bought it at a thrift store specifically for today. The air smelled of wood smoke and roasted turkey, a scent that used to fill my chest with warmth. Today, it just made my stomach churn with dread. When I knocked on the heavy oak door, it wasn't opened with a warm embrace. It was pulled ajar by Richard, my 32-year-old son, a hedge fund manager who wore a custom-tailored suit to eat dinner in his mother's dining room. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the scuffed leather of my old boots and the patched elbow of my coat. There was no pity in his gaze, only profound irritation. "You made it," Richard said, his voice flat, not bothering to step aside to let me in. "Listen, Dad, before you come in here, let's get one thing straight. Mom is a wreck over this whole bankruptcy thing. So whatever sob story you brought with you, leave it on the porch. We aren't doing the charity case routine today." I swallowed the lump of rising anger in my throat. "Hello, Richard. Happy Thanksgiving to you, too." He scoffed, finally stepping back. I walked into the grand foyer, the crystal chandelier casting a harsh light on my poverty. The house was immaculate, buzzing with the low, sophisticated jazz Eleanor always played to make herself feel like old money. Eleanor emerged from the kitchen, wearing a cashmere sweater and a string of pearls I had bought her for our 20th anniversary. When she saw me, her face tightened into a mask of polite disgust. "William," she said, keeping a solid 3 feet of distance between us. "You're late, and you tracked snow onto the Persian rug. Please take those horrific boots off immediately." "Traffic was bad," I lied, slipping off the boots and standing in my worn socks. "The house smells wonderful, Eleanor." "Yes, well, the caterers did a passable job," she replied, inspecting her manicured nails. "Go wash up. We are sitting down now. And William, please try not to talk about your situation. We want to have a pleasant meal." I walked into the dining room. The table was a masterpiece of holiday excess. Fine china, gleaming silver, towering floral arrangements. My 2 daughters, Caroline and Claire, were already seated with their respective husbands. They offered me tight-lipped smiles, the kind you give to a panhandler when you're waiting for a traffic light to change. I moved toward my usual seat at the head of the table, but Richard quickly slid into it. "Actually, Dad, I'm carving today," Richard said, not looking up. "You can sit at the end, next to Leo." Leo was Claire's 7-year-old son, my grandson, and the only pure soul in the room. He didn't care about stock portfolios or country clubs. He just cared that his grandfather was here. His face lit up, and he patted the empty chair next to him. I smiled, a genuine crack in my armor, and took the seat. It was the furthest position from the center of gravity in the room. I had been officially demoted from patriarch to an embarrassing footnote. The meal began, and the microaggressions flowed as freely as the expensive Bordeaux I was not offered. They passed the platters of turkey, stuffing, and glazed carrots, but by the time the dishes reached my end of the table, they were mostly scraped clean. I quietly scooped a meager portion of mashed potatoes onto my plate and kept my head down. "So, Richard," Eleanor projected her voice over the soft jazz, "how is the new firm? Are the bonuses looking as robust as you hoped?" "Better than expected, Mom," Richard smirked, slicing his turkey with aggressive confidence. "We just closed a merger that's going to net me 7 figures before Christmas. It's all about making smart, calculated moves. Not tying your capital up in dead-end commercial real estate like some people." The jab was so blatant, so cruel, that the table fell silent for a fraction of a second. Claire took a nervous sip of her wine. Caroline laughed, a sharp, tinkling sound. "Well, some people just don't have the stomach for modern business. Ricky?" Caroline chimed in. She turned to me, her eyes glittering with malice. "Speaking of which, Dad, a friend of mine manages a high-end apartment complex downtown. They're looking for a night security guard. I could put in a good word. It pays minimum wage, but hey, it's better than living on the street." I looked at the daughter I had stayed awake with for countless nights when she had asthma attacks as a child. I had bought her a horse when she was 10. I had paid for her destination wedding in Tuscany. "I appreciate the thought, Caroline," I said quietly, "but my back isn't what it used to be. Working nights would be difficult." "Beggars can't be choosers, William," Eleanor snapped from the other end of the table. "You made a series of incredibly foolish, reckless decisions that humiliated this family. The least you can do is take whatever menial work is available to stop being a burden." I had to resign from the hospital gala committee because I couldn't bear the pitying looks. "I'm sorry my financial ruin inconvenienced your social calendar, Eleanor," I replied, the sarcasm finally bleeding into my voice. Richard slammed his fork down. "Watch your tone with her. You have no right to come into her house and act like a victim. You blew it. You lost everything because you were arrogant and stupid." I took a deep breath. It was time for the final test. I pushed my half-empty plate away and folded my hands on the mahogany table. "You're right," I said, making eye contact with each of them. "I made mistakes, and right now, I am facing a very cold winter. The rent on my apartment is due on Tuesday, and I don't have it. My heating bill is in arrears. I am asking, as your father and as your husband, for a loan, just $5,000. Enough to get me through the next 2 months so I can get back on my feet." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't a silence of contemplation. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated horror. Richard actually laughed. A dry, humorless bark. $5,000? Are you insane? Do you know what my overhead is right now? I'm not throwing good money after bad. You are a sinking ship, Dad. "I agree," Claire said, looking away, refusing to meet my eyes. "We have our own families to think about. It's not our job to bail you out of your own mess. You should have planned better." "I don't have a dime to spare for you," Eleanor said coldly. "And frankly, William, asking us for money today is incredibly manipulative and inappropriate. You have ruined Thanksgiving." My heart shattered, not into jagged pieces, but into a fine, cold dust. I had my answer. I had given these people everything, and in my darkest hour, they wouldn't spare a drop of water if I were on fire. Suddenly, a small hand tugged on my sleeve. I looked down. Little Leo was staring at me with wide, sad eyes. He reached into the pocket of his little suit jacket and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and 3 quarters. "Here, Grandpa," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. "It's from my piggy bank. You can have it to stay warm." Tears, hot and fierce, pricked the corners of my eyes. I closed my hand over his little fingers, pushing the money gently back toward him. "Thank you, my boy, but Grandpa is going to be just fine." At that exact moment, the heavy brass doorbell chimed, echoing through the tense silence of the house. "Who on earth is that?" Eleanor demanded, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. "We aren't expecting anyone." "I'll get it," Leo yelled, happy for an excuse to leave the suffocating table. He scrambled out of his chair and ran down the hallway before anyone could stop him. We heard the heavy door creak open, followed by a deep, authoritative voice. A moment later, a man stepped into the arched doorway of the dining room. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal pinstripe suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. It was Arthur Sterling, the senior partner of the most ruthless estate law firm in Boston. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard stood up, his face flushing with anger. "Who the hell are you, and how did you get in here?" "The child let me in," Arthur said calmly, stepping fully into the room. "And I am here on official legal business. My name is Arthur Sterling. I represent Mr. William Barrett." Eleanor scoffed, standing up. Legal business? On Thanksgiving? William doesn't have a lawyer. He can't even afford to pay his rent. Now get out of my house before I call the police. Arthur didn't flinch. He walked over to the mahogany table, popped the golden latches on his briefcase, and pulled out a sleek silver tablet. I assure you, Mrs. Barrett, your husband can afford my services. In fact, he can afford my entire firm. I am here to execute a prearranged directive regarding the Barrett family irrevocable trust. What trust? Caroline sneered. He's bankrupt. No, Caroline, I said, my voice cutting through the room with a calm, terrifying authority. I slowly stood up. I didn't look like a broken old man anymore. I stood tall, the weight of the last 3 months evaporating from my shoulders. I am not bankrupt. Arthur tapped the screen of his tablet. 4 weeks ago, Mr. Barrett became the sole winner of the multi-state Powerball lottery. After electing the lump sum payout and accounting for state and federal taxes, Mr. Barrett deposited exactly $68,400,000 into a newly formed trust. The color drained from Richard's face so fast I thought he might pass out. Eleanor staggered backward, her hand flying to her throat, grasping her pearls as if she were choking on them. Claire let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp. 68 million. Richard stammered, his eyes bulging. Dad, you won the lottery? Why didn't you tell us? Why did you say you were broke? Because, Arthur interjected smoothly, turning the tablet around to face them. Mr. Barrett instructed me to draft a very specific character clause in the distribution of his estate. He wanted to know who he was giving his money to. He wanted to know how his family would treat him when he had nothing left to offer them but himself. Arthur pressed play on the tablet. A video appeared on the screen, dated 3 weeks ago. It was me, sitting in Arthur's office, looking directly into the camera. If you are watching this, the digital version of me said, it means I have executed the stress test. I am going to ask my wife and children for help. A meager sum. If they treat me with dignity, if they offer me a hand when I am down, the trust will be divided equally among them. However, if they abandon me, if they humiliate me, this recording serves as my undeniable, legally binding declaration of sound mind to execute Plan B. The video ended. The dining room was as silent as a graveyard. Plan B, Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling, the reality of what she had just lost crushing her chest. Plan B, Arthur said, pulling a stack of heavy, watermarked documents from his briefcase. Dictates that Eleanor, Richard, Caroline, and Claire Barrett are entirely and permanently excised from the trust. You will receive nothing. Not a single cent. Furthermore, Mr. Barrett has already instructed me to finalize the divorce proceedings initiated by Mrs. Barrett, utilizing the prenuptial agreement that ensures she receives only the assets currently in her name. The rest of the $68 million will be placed into a locked generational fund for the grandchildren, accessible only when they turn 25. Arthur looked down at Leo, who was staring in wide-eyed wonder. With a special, immediate educational and welfare stipend allocated exclusively to young Leo, as a reward for his generosity. Dad, wait! Richard panicked, lunging forward, his hands raised in surrender. Dad, we were just stressed. The economy is bad. And we were shocked. We didn't mean any of it. You can't do this. I'm your son. You aren't a son, Richard, I said, my voice cold as ice. You're a parasite in a custom suit. You watched your father beg for heat in the winter, and you laughed. You told me I was a sinking ship. Well, I am cutting the anchors. William, please, Eleanor cried, actual tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. 35 years. You can't just throw us away. I'm your wife. You threw me away 3 weeks ago, Eleanor, I replied, grabbing my cheap wool coat off the back of the chair. I just made it official. I turned to Leo, kneeling down so I was eye level with him. I reached into my pocket and handed him back his $5 bill and 3 quarters. Keep this safe, buddy. You have a good heart. Never let these people take it from you. Grandpa will come see you very soon, I promise. I stood up, signaling to Arthur. The lawyer closed his briefcase with a loud, definitive snap. We turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving behind a chorus of desperate sobbing, panicked screaming, and the shattering realization of absolute ruin. When I stepped out onto the front porch, the cold November wind didn't bite anymore. Felt incredibly refreshing. I took a deep breath, the scent of pine and freedom filling my lungs. I walked past the rented Honda Civic, heading straight for the sleek, black Lincoln Navigator Arthur had parked on the street. I had lost a family today, but for the first time in my life, I had bought my own freedom. And it was worth every single penny.